right. So our guest is Peter Norvig, and I'll read a little bit about his bio because I think it's just fantastic. If you've been working in tech, you're a software engineer, been working with artificial intelligence, he needs no introduction. I think he's the co-author of one of the seminal books or textbooks about artificial intelligence, and on top of that, I think he has worked in like fields that I think are just some of the exponents of human endeavor. So he worked for NASA, and where he headed a computational division here at Ames, which is right very close here in Mountain View. And then after that, he joined Google, right, where he's currently a director of research. And then before that, he directed Google's core search algorithms, which sounds like pretty important in Google. And, but on top of that, right, so he takes a foray into education and really helped kind of kickstart the kind of the movement for like massive online classes with a class about artificial intelligence that signed up more than 160,000 students. So I think that was really amazing. So it's great to have you here, Peter. And
great to be here. Thanks.
So yeah, so I wanted to kind of just get started by. I think it's a very interesting place that we are in here because it's the SRI, the house of so many innovations in technology, including voice recognition and Siri that came out of these buildings here. But I think we're a little bit in a kind of crossroads for artificial intelligence, where after a long time, then not much has happened. Then we had a lot of progress, right? But now there's also some anxiety that came out of the rise of artificial intelligence. So I'll start with like a very general question. How do you feel about the future of humanity and artificial intelligence role in it?
So I think any powerful technology has an influence on society and humanity. And I think we should think about AI that way and compare it to other technologies, like maybe like the internal combustion engine, which overall has been great for society. It means we can get food to people so they don't starve. It means people can visit the world. It means they can have jobs that are farther away and better chances for employment. So all those things are great. But it also has led to pollution, and some people have complained that it's changed the structure of the cities and suburbs for the worse. So there are these unintended consequences, and that's something you always have to look out for. So I see the future of AI as being overall positive, but there will be unintended consequences, and that's why I think it's great that people now are starting to pay attention to that. We didn't have all these committees and organizations like in 1909 saying, let's worry about these newfangled cars. It just kind of snuck up on us, and maybe we'll be more prepared for the changes in AI.
That's great. And I'll make sure I'll leave a lot of time for the audience to ask questions. I'm sure a lot of you will want to do that. And I want to dig a little bit further into this because it's one of the, actually came up during one of the previous Q&A sessions, which is, there's a debate around whether we've seen other technology revolutions before, right? Or the Industrial Revolution, for example. But there's some debate on whether this time is different, whether the AI revolution is fundamentally different, and whether, specifically jobs are going to be heavily impacted because of AI adoption. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's hard to predict, especially the future. And there is this one sentiment that says every time in the past more jobs have been created than have been lost. We just do different things now. There aren't as many horse trainers as there are, but there are more car mechanics and so on. But this time could be different, right? There's always a chance that this time is different, and here maybe there are some signs. I think that one thing we should remember is that the way things are now is not the way things have always been, right? So now we have this notion that you should have a job But we've only had that notion for about 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. Before that, you lived your life. You didn't have a job. You didn't punch in your time card. None of that existed. That was an invention. And it was an invention in a weird way that aggregated a lot of things that don't necessarily have to be the same. So one, it was the primary way in which we created the goods that society needs. Two, it was the primary way that you got the income you needed to support yourself and your family. Three, it was one of the main ways you had of having a sense of self-worth, at least for some people. For others, they didn't find that satisfaction in the job. And fourth, in the US at least, we threw in the idea that your health care should come through your job, which is crazy, but we aggregated all four of those things together. And so don't just think of, well, what's going to happen to jobs, think of what's going to happen to all those four components, right? And they're all going to exist somehow, but maybe they'll be broken up in a different way. And I think a lot of people have fears about that, right? So one thing is it could be different because the technologies are so powerful. The other thing is it could be different just because it changes faster, right? So we have experienced great change before.
Going from an economy where most of the people were farmers to where hardly anybody is a farmer. But that took more than a generation. So it was, I was a farmer and my father was a farmer, but it looks like my kids are going to move off to the city and do something else. And that's too bad, but they'll handle it. Now I had this job for 3 years and then it was automated away. And then I had another job for 2 years and it was automated away. And then one job for 1 year, and now I'm kind of pissed. Right? It's going too fast for me. So I think we have to worry about that. And so I think that's more of a societal question than a technology question. And it was interesting, there was a poll in Norway recently that said, how worried are you about this technological disruption of jobs? And I forget the exact number, but the answer is basically not much. They say, yeah, my job might disappear, but I feel like the government's got my back. And, I'll be retrained and I'll...
Which country was that again?
In Norway, right? And so there they feel like they've got it under control. In the US, not so much. There isn't that feeling that you're going to be safe if your job gets pulled away. So I think we're going to have to think as a society, what kind of safety net do we need, right? I think another way of looking at it is that we've always had this notion that a job is in some ways an insurance policy. Right, so you get insurance to protect against a large downturn, and you pay some premium for that. And jobs definitely pay the premium, right? So I have a job with one employer, and they get most of my time, and they pay me for that. But I'm sure for both of us, it's suboptimal, right? There could be some amount of my time that I could spend better someplace else. And there could be some other person that they could have hired for a short term rather than me to do some of my functions. But we come to this agreement that's suboptimal because it's easy. Because in the past we had low information, it was harder to hire somebody for a short-term gig. And because it was insurance, that I'm not really trying to maximize my income from the job. I'm trying to have some stability so that I don't have fears and worries, right? And jobs are good for that because they gave you this stability even if they didn't maximize your income. Entrepreneurs are more willing to trade off that stability for eventual high return, but most people want the stability. And so I think that's an important part of the job as well. And we're going to have to figure out some way to have that as a society. It doesn't have to come through a job.
I love your analogy with the horse caretakers. I was reading about that. There were a lot of people that are employed to just, take care of the horses. And there are also a lot of horses, right? So we're not the horse. Hopefully we're the horse caretaker. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is around, let's switch a little bit to education, right? And so you're pioneering online education and you played a key role in even getting complex topics like AI being taught at scale. Education is something that I think a lot of people from Brazil agree holds the country back, right? Because there hasn't been historically enough investment. And now it seems to be needed more than ever, right? So how do you think the school, how do you think the school or university of the future will look like? And do you feel like there will be less value for formal education, or how do you see those things?
Yeah, I think there'll be less formal education. I think we have again, we came up with this odd system for historical reasons, right? Where we've said for many decades, the thing you should do is go to a university for 4 years, and then you get a certificate that says you never have to learn anything ever again. Right? And that just seems wrong, right? So we should have lifelong learning, and you're not going to want to live in a dorm room all your life, so it's going to have to be outside of formal education for most of what you want to learn. And will we still have colleges and college degrees? Probably yes. I think some of that was really not so much education focused as it was kind of perpetuating class differences, where you could prove you were from the right class because you went to the right school and had the right degree. And that was unfortunate and unequal. But in trying to disrupt that, in some ways we've gone towards a system that says, well, everybody's going to go to college. But once you have that, then there's no differentiator, and now there's less value to having that degree. It doesn't say that you're special. And so you've got to prove your worth in other ways. And that could be through non-traditional types of education. Could be through taking these online classes or whatever. Could be through vocational schools or junior colleges and so on. Or it could be through life experiences.
Does Google require a college degree to become to apply to become a software engineer at Google?
No. So we're looking for the right skills. Now, the easiest way to demonstrate that you probably have those skills is to say, I went to this school that we know and understand, and I got this degree, right? So that's sort of the first way of passing the test. But we certainly take people who can pass that test in other ways, right? So we've hired a bunch of people that we sought out by saying, hey, we see you're leading this open source project. We think it's really cool. We want something like that. Can you come do it for us? And if they say, I never got a degree, I said, well, we don't care. You've shown you can do exactly what we want you to do because you built this project. And we want somebody who can build projects. We don't want somebody who can get good grades in their classes necessarily.
Yeah, so that seems to be a big shift, right, in how we used to do things. Because now you can have a kid in Brazil that maintains a key, component of an open source project, and then that becomes, their work is evident in that open source community. That's amazing. So one of the things that and I'm a parent of 3 kids in elementary school, and myself, I try to think about what are the things that will be important for them, in the future. And I know it's hard to predict the future, but do you have any advice for people like me that have, that are trying to think of how to better coach their children into a happy future where they contribute to society?
So first of all, I want to take you mostly off the hook and say,
thank you.
It's not up to you, it's up to the kids,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So most of them succeeding or not is going to be what they do. Now, you can certainly set a good example for them and say, these are the types of things I'm headed for in life, and you might want to consider, is that what you want to do as well? You can give them access to opportunities, right? So you can say, here's something that I read that's interesting, here's some resources you can use, and you can encourage them to be curious. Demonstrate to them, here's something I'm wondering about. That's really interesting. Let me try to figure out how it works out, and let them see that that's part of your life and it can be part of their life.
That's great. I have lots of other questions, but I want to start opening up for the audience. So we make sure everyone has a chance to ask questions. I think we got one all the way in the back there. I don't know how close the mic is.
Well, we just came from Singularity, and they say that accelerated change is coming. So would you say that the future of work will be learning and will be paid to adapt? Or
I think that's certainly true. It's definitely true in my workplace. That may not be representative of everybody's workplace. But one of the projects I was involved with is teaching our engineers about machine learning. Right? So we certainly hire a lot of experts in machine learning, PhDs and so on. But we've also hired a bunch of people who are software engineers, but say, I'm working on a project and it seems like I should get me some of that machine learning stuff. So we put 10,000 engineers through this crash course. And they didn't need to go back to school for a year. It was a short course, and now they're productive to various degrees, and some of them made it a big, important part of their work and their careers. And others said, I just had this one problem. I learned enough to solve this one problem. Now I'm done. And when I run into get the next roadblock, then I'm going to take the next crash course and learn a little bit more. And I think that's a good way to proceed, and that's the way we've been doing it. And we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I think this is a great. You said 10,000 engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's amazing to see like a company like Google that suddenly it essentially turns into its own university internally, right?
Yeah.
To basically get their already skilled workforce.
Right.
And
that was the subject I was most involved with, but we certainly have lots of other subjects, right? So there's brand new things that people hadn't thought about before, right? So we've been adding in new aspects, say, of our launch review process. So we added a privacy review a few years back. We added a fairness review more recently. And knowing how to handle that is new skills that older engineers didn't have at all, and newer ones are just beginning to learn about. But we stepped up and said, everybody's going to have to learn how to do this.
That's great. Next person, we have one over here.
The first is two questions, one a short one. He mentioned, what to do for the little kids in terms of technology. You said, you can give good examples and stimulate some things. What do you think you should not do? How much screen time, little kids should have? So that's a short question. And the longer one, it's about Google. It got so big, so diverse, so open environment. Is the culture of Google is still a good environment to keep growing at the same pace as before, or that become also, there are some reports about it. My name is Fabio, I'm from Indicator Capital.
Thank you, Fabio. So first of all, my kids are a bit older, so I didn't have this issue of saying, should I ban them from having phones or computers or tablets or whatever. They weren't quite at that age. I think I would want to focus more on encouraging them to do the right things rather than trying to ban the wrong things, right? So encourage people to say, hey, you should get outside. You should see the real world. And not say you're not allowed to look at your screen, but say, look how attractive it is to take some time away from your screen. So I would emphasize that kind of approach. Then in terms of Google, yeah, certainly the culture has changed. So I joined in 2001. We were 200 people in one building. It's bigger than that now. It had the real feel of a startup from the beginning. And, as you mentioned, I left this job at NASA, and a lot of people said, are you crazy giving up this steady job for this startup thing that could go under? And I said, I kind of think they're not going to go under, but I also felt like even if they do, it'll be a great experience, and it has been. I felt like the company kept that kind of startup culture right up until the financial crisis in 2008. So that was really the first time that I had a budget. Up until then, the lesson, especially from Larry Page, was the only cost that matters is opportunity cost. So, go out and hire everybody who's super well qualified and do everything you can do, because there's more work that we have to do than we could possibly get to. So full speed ahead. Then when the financial crisis hit, all of a sudden that was the first time that it felt a little bit adversarial of saying, there's a hiring freeze, and if I get this resource, that means maybe you won't. And for the first time, people were looking at each other in a different way. We got past that, we started hiring again, but I think there is still more of a feel now that is a bit more adversarial. And I think we do a pretty good job of saying everybody's working together. I think part of the structure of the company enables us to do that. I remember I had a colleague that I worked with before who ended up going to Amazon, and he said he was at Amazon and he built this thing where if you're listening to music, they'll show you books and t-shirts and posters and so on from the same artist. And he showed that to the head of music, and he said, well, how is that going to help me make my monthly quota? Right? Amazon sells a t-shirt, that doesn't help me. My job is to sell music. Right? And at Google, we never had that because we knew most of the money comes in through ads, and everybody else's job is just manufacture happy customers. And so there was much more of a feeling of everybody working together rather than there's one unit working against another unit. And that's something I've always enjoyed with working there, and I think that's something that mostly holds true today.
I'm Gus with Lambda Cars. You mentioned the unintended consequences of AI technology. What do you think about universal basic income, or is there any other tool to move society to protect those workers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I feel like I don't know enough yet, and maybe nobody knows enough yet, right? So we're just starting to do some trials with universal basic income, and you know, there's a question of, oh, well, I'm going to try it and see if it works. I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it, because there's not one it, right? That's like saying, well, I want to see if social networks worked, so I tried GeoCities and that didn't work, so therefore all social networks will never be successful, right? I think the details of exactly how you do it are really important, and we need 100 trials before we know what will work and what won't work, and it'll be different in different cultures. It also ties into this idea of how should we do charity or philanthropy. And a lot of people are saying now, you know, direct money transfers are much more efficient than other ways of doing it, so we should investigate that as well. There's alternatives to UBI, like earned income tax credit and other ways of approaching it. And I don't know what the right answer is. We should experiment. But I think what we should be shooting for is what I talked about earlier, is that people should have a sense of a safety net or a sense of not having dread, of saying, yes, there will be changes in the future. These changes may be happening more rapidly than they did in the past, but I feel like I won't be left behind. And you know, maybe I'll have to do some work, maybe there'll be some down years, but they won't be a complete bust. There'll be a small hit from which I can recover. And whatever method helps us give you that sense of security, I'm all for that.
Hi. I'd like to know your opinion about some regulations like GDPR that put some boundaries about the data that companies can store and how they can use the data. Do you see that as a kind of a roadblock for the advancement of machine learning, or do you see that as a necessary thing for our society?
Yeah, I think protection of users is very important, and I think what you know, our peer companies want is some more certainty as to where that's all going, and you know, we can respond to GDPR, and a couple of weeks ago I spent some time sort of counseling one of my team members who had to work on that and sort of helping him down, saying it's okay, right? Because it was a very useful thing for us to do, because we had gotten to the point where we didn't know what our data was, right? So in order to, according to GDPR, in order to use some data, you have to have permission from it. So we have thousands and thousands of databases, and you can go through and say, where did this data come from? Well, this table came from these 4 other tables. Where did that come from? That came from these others. Where did that come from? Well, I don't know. The person who collected that left the company and didn't write it down. So we've had to fix all that. And that was a good, painful but useful process for us to do. And from now on, we'll have that. And so I think that's good. I would hate for us to have to do it slightly differently 5 different times for the European Union and the US and for every other jurisdiction.
But Brazil has its own kind of...
Brazil is right. Everybody's got their own. It would be much better if they were, either there was a universal one or at least they were very similar so that you were doing the same things in different regions. I think that would help industry a lot to know what to expect. I think it would also help if the people writing these laws just understood the technology a little better, right? Because I think that's, in some cases they don't, and they're thinking about it in the wrong way. So I'd like to get better input there to write better laws. I'm not against having that regulation, but I want it to be helpful for all parties. I think in some other places we've made the wrong call in balancing the value of data versus the value of privacy protection. So like in HIPAA, the health protection in the US, we said it's very important for patients' health data to be private. That's certainly true, but we made it very hard to use that data for research to cure diseases. We've done things like saying every time you want to use the data for something else, you have to get permission again, whereas probably we should have made it more easy to say, if the patient gives permission once, then you can use the data, and if you invent some new procedure that could use that data, you already have the permission. We can't do that now, and that would have been really helpful for research. And we have ways of anonymizing the data so that there's no risk, but we haven't made the right trade-off in understanding those risks.
I'm Fabio from Brazil. I'm the founder of EdTech. We've been discussing a lot about the future of education, how education needs to change and everything. However, last year, for every dollar invested in fintechs, only 25 cents of dollar was invested in edtechs. So how can we improve education if there is not enough capital to, for edtechs to reinvent it?
So the question is, should we have more funding for education? Is that what the question is, or yeah?
I mean, what way education is not appealing as other areas for investment?
Yeah, I think it's a little tricky. Part of the problem is, I think, finding the right business model. And so, I was involved at the start when we had Udacity and Coursera coming out right in the early days. And there wasn't quite that clear of a model then. And I think Udacity has settled more on this kind of job training type approach. I think that's probably a good way to go. I'd like to see more kind of pay-as-you-go approaches of saying the training is free, but if you get a job afterwards, then either you pay or your employer pays, and you don't have to put up as much up front. I think, in the US we have a real crisis of student debt, and we could have avoided that by having better approaches to that. So I think that's important. And I'm not sure where all the investment can come from, right? So there are multiple sources in education, right? So governments have been heavily involved in education to different degrees in different countries in different ways. Philanthropy has been very involved, has been one of the Gates Foundation's core part of investment. And then for-profit companies have come in and tried to find their niche. I guess I'm okay with the money coming from any of those sources, as long as it's successful. And we should find the right way. Maybe there's some kind of public-private partnerships that would be a better way forward.
I think one thing you mentioned is there's these shared income agreements now, right? And that seems to be promising. Like these companies that you join the boot camp and you don't pay anything, but then if you get a job that pays more than X, then
Yeah, I think that's a good model.
Peter, this is Clever from Everflow. I just realized I forgot your book back at home. I have the first edition, should have brought it, sorry. AI has been through these peaks and valleys over time. So there was a big hype in the 60s, and then it got forgotten for a while. Back again in the 80s, 90s, just to be completely ostracized and maybe, call it machine learning, but don't call it artificial intelligence one day. And then all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it. But the hype seems to be getting so big that there are customers asking for what's probably impossible at the moment. Like, get all my manuals, learn everything, and then figure out what the problem is. Do you foresee a new AI winter coming?
I guess I've been at it for a long time, so I'm not so worried about the day-to-day weather reports. And certainly there is a lot of hype now, and you mentioned companies with unrealistic expectations. I think in addition to that, we also face people just say, well, I don't care what it is, but I got to have the right brand name on it, right? It's got to say AI or machine learning or deep learning, and I don't know where the technology is going. Although I can predict 10 years from now, we're still going to have the brand name deep learning because it's such a strong brand. And even if the technology behind it is completely different than what we have today, we'll probably keep the words around. And there will be backlashes and changes. I think we're where we are now for a variety of reasons. I think a lot of it has to do with more data being available and more hardware being available. And some of it is people came up with some really cool new algorithms. But I certainly remember the day in, I think it was 1982, when Jeff Hinton came to Berkeley when I was a new grad student and said, hey, here's this neural net stuff. And we just thought it was so cool. And we went back to the lab, and there was nothing you could download then, so we built a package from scratch, and we ran a simple problem, and it got the right answer, and we were really excited, and we ran the next most complicated one, and it got it. And then we ran sort of the first real problem, and overnight it hadn't converged, and we let it run the second or third day, and it still hadn't converged, and so then we gave up, and we went back to our old style AI. But if we had had today's processor, those 3 or 4 days would have been 2 minutes or something, and maybe if we waited another 2 minutes, we would have got the right answer, and we would have all been neural net researchers instead of where we were. So I think some of it is the time is right because of the circumstances, and that's not going to change, right? So it's not going to get worse. The people who have the expectations that this can do everything will be disappointed, but we're only going to get better at recognizing cats or recognizing speech or all those things, and self-driving cars and so on. So that's going to be continually increasing, and then the question will be what sort of applications come out of that.
Hi, Renato here. So I'm curious to see, like with China coming on and different cultural and ethical values and privacy concerns versus a place like the US where we have to worry about privacy and different set of ethical values. How can we compete with that set of values or that set of speed?
Yeah. I don't know that much about China. I've talked to some people who know a lot more. I've read Kai-Fu Lee's book. To me, it seems like privacy isn't the biggest difference. It's more kind of the attitude towards intellectual property. That in China, the way to succeed is to take somebody else's business model and implement it better. Right? To be the Uber or the DoorDash or whatever of China, and nobody cares about what intellectual property. You just try to copy somebody else and win in terms of execution. And that's really good for the consumer, because it means lots of people are competing to be the best, and a good one will end up winning out. It means that the business models there tend to be different. So in order to differentiate yourself, often you have to have more vertically integrated, right? So you can't just say, I'm going to have the software to do Uber or to do DoorDash. You're going to say, and I'm going to hire all the people to drive around, and I'm going to make the motor scooters that they're going to drive around, and I'm going to have the whole stack from top to bottom and run that more efficiently. than anyone else. So success there is driven by a different type of approach, and it's I don't want to say one approach is better than another. It's just different. And so far, markets have been kept fairly separate. It's one, it's been difficult for companies outside China to compete within China, but it's also been somewhat difficult for Chinese companies to compete with the rest of the world. And I think that's starting to change, and when it does, then we'll see more of this kind of cultural shock as the two bump up against each other more.
I was curious what you think the future of Google looks like. Is it 5-10 years down the road? Is it going to be ads still their main business, or is it going to be something else, Waymo, or whatever you guys are working on in the research side?
Right, so we made this distinction of saying we're going to have two names now. There's Alphabet is the holding company that contains Google plus Waymo plus other companies, and then Google is just one part of that. So an increasing part will be these other companies, and maybe Waymo will be very successful, maybe not, but and there's other ones. There's a couple of health companies and so on, and we'll try to see which one of those works. For now, I don't see any changes in the way ads work. There's certainly refinements in terms of privacy and so on, but it looks like that's what people want. It's not like we invented that. The same choices were made when the new technology of radio came along and when television came along. For most part, for newspapers as well, you did pay some actual money for papers, but most of the revenue for the papers also came from ads. So as a society, we just like ads. And I don't know why, but we do. And I find it kind of crazy that there's this idea, well, the internet should be free, and yet people are willing to happily give $100 a month to their cell service and TV service provider. But when the New Yorker or the New York Times says you should give me $1, people say, "Oh no, the internet should be free." Right? I don't get that. I would rather pay more money for content and less for just the service delivery. But we're not there. So I'd be happy to switch and have Google go along with that, but I don't think the consumers are ready yet.
So, my question. Can speak loud.
Sorry.
Keep waiting for the streaming. If the microphone can come here.
Yeah. My name is Silveira. I was curious. You mentioned earlier with the 11,000 engineers you have working on AI. We talked about privacy. I guess this has been the bulk of the work at Google, and one of the things you guys have been trying to figure out. I was wondering, you did mention something about a fairness review, and this is something that always makes me think when I think of AI, the responsibility of developers and how you in your position see ethics and how to apply ethical principles in developing machine learning. I know the European Commission started sort of a task force to create kind of an ethical code for developing AI, and I was just curious what you think about that and how to approach it.
Right. So we put together a panel and we created our own set of AI principles, and you can see them on the website. And as I said, we have a training process internally to make sure people understand those. And we feel this is an important part of everything we build. Fairness is one part of those principles. And we're required by law to be fair with respect to certain protected classes. And then we also say, well, we think we can go beyond that. And I think we're just beginning to, as a field, understand these whole issues of what does fairness even mean? And I think it changes the way we think about what programming is, right? So you start off by saying, well, programming is you tell the computer what to do step by step. So it's like you're a micromanager and you're telling the computer, this is what you have to do. With AI, we're telling the computer more, I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to tell you what I want, what it is I'm trying to optimize. I'm trying to get the highest score on this metric, and then the machine learning system figures out how to do it. So it's a different way of interacting with computers, but it means we have to do a good job of specifying what it is that we want. What is it that we're trying to optimize? And we have 50 years of software engineering experience to do it the micromanager way, and only a couple of years of saying this is how you should specify what you want. Now, as a society, we have a long tradition, we have legends of saying we're not very good at saying what we want, right? So King Midas was asked for a software specification of what he wants, and he got a bug. He said, I want everything I touch to turn to gold. And that was wrong. He didn't do any unit tests, right? He didn't ask for an undo function. That would have been really crucial and helpful if he had specified that. But he got it wrong. And, we have all these legends of, if you find a lamp and the genie says you get 3 wishes, you're pretty sure you're going to screw it up. Right? You're going to ask for something that you think sounds right, but the genie's going to do it and technically go by your words, but they're going to be wrong. Right? So we're really bad at saying what we want with our words. And I think we need a whole new science of kind of software engineering for machine learning or for utility functions to say, can we get this right? And that's making these silly mistakes like King Midas did. And it's also bigger questions of what counts as fair, right? So we've had famous cases like this ProRepublica report on the system, Compass system that was doing scoring for recidivism in parole cases. So should this guy get parole? The judge has to make a decision. The judge is given this automatically generated score that says this guy gets a 6. And the question is that score fair, let's say across races? And the creators of that system says, yeah, it's fair because look, we tested. And when you get a 6, if you're white, you have a 59% chance of recommitting a crime, and if you're black, you have a 58% chance or something like that. It's essentially the same. So that means we got it fair. The critic says, yeah, that aspect is fair, but when you make a mistake, you're twice as likely to make a mistake that disadvantages a black person than a white person. So therefore, you're unfair. Then the next step was researchers says, okay, so there's 2 different metrics. Why don't we optimize both of them? And then they quickly proved that it's impossible to optimize both of those, that you have to trade off one versus the other. And we as a society have to decide which of those 2 metrics is more important, or where should we turn the dial as to what mistakes do we want to make and who will they disadvantage. And we haven't really had those conversations yet, right? So we've left all these things kind of implicit. The judges can do whatever they want. Now that they're encoded in algorithms, we have to be more explicit. So I'm kind of hopeful that we can arrive at a better place where we say now we're actually confronting these issues for the first time rather than using intuition. But it does mean we're going to have to decide what counts as fair.
Hi, Marco DeMello from BeSafe. I have a question a little more esoteric. Fascinating waiting in hearing your perspective on these topics. Very few people that hear the words AI understand really what it means, as you correctly put. And it became sexy like cloud computing was 5 years ago. Everybody today wants to say they're doing machine learning or deep learning or AI. You already said that. It's absolutely true. There are 2 parts of my question. One, how do you feel about the limitation Moore's law as it pertains to microtransistors, minimization, so you can actually create wafers that can continue to expand the capacity for deep learning and for AI? Or it's an issue like this. Silveira just announced the first 3D transistor wafer, and I think there's some hardware concerns that I start to see happening in terms of the massive amounts of data we have to process for things like autonomous driving or surgical procedures or even judicial procedures that you just touched on. The second part of my question is about how you see generalized AI versus specialized AI. We've been talking all the session here about specialized AI. As you correctly put, you optimize for a given expectation of output, and you put machine learning to learn on the most ample data set to get the most optimized answer if you know how to specify which answer you're looking for. That's specialized AI. Generalized AI is a completely different animal. I wanted to hear your perspective on that, and
how long in horizon you think we are from generalized AI, and you can think it'll be a benevolent God or, potentially our doom. Some people, there's discussions on both sides of what generalized AI would look like if it ever became sentient. So, wanted to hear your perspective on both, which just hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. I'm excited about a lot of computing technologies. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of the advances we have now are because we have better processors. And following that at multiple levels, in the data centers, in our phones where the batteries are important, and in Internet of things which are even smaller and the battery's more important. I just bought a GPS tracker collar for my dog. It's about the 1/8 of the size of a cell phone, so most of it is the battery, but there's a little bit of processing in there. And that's going to be increasingly important. And then, the dark horse coming up from behind is quantum computing. We're working on this idea of quantum supremacy, and you may see some results soon. I don't know how that's going to play out. Then you asked about general AI. I guess I'm mostly happy with where we are today in terms of most people are working on specific applications. I'm a speech or machine translation or computer vision researcher. I'm not trying to build a duplicate human. We know how to build duplicate humans. My wife and I did it twice. You guys did it. I gotta say, my wife did a lot more of the work than I did. And so it's great that some people are thinking about that. But if you went back to 1903 and said, okay, Orville and Wilbur, you launched that plane, that's great, but what we really need is general flight that can be a helicopter and an airliner and a jet fighter and land on the moon. So let's work on that, right? No, that would have been a mistake, because first we had to develop better prop engines, and we had to develop jet engines and 100 other core technologies before we could even think about something more general. On the other hand, it also would have been a mistake to say, you know what, this is really cool, and now DARPA's going to have a yearly challenge to make a better balsa wood and canvas biplane. That would have been too specific. Right? So we want the range in the middle, and I think the field as a whole is handling that range just about right.
We're running out of time, but that's going to be our last question.
Just two more questions. Complementing actually the question about quantum. So how do you envision when it's going to be available, and what would be the changes in the technology?
I'm sorry.
With quantum.
Oh, quantum, yeah. I don't know, right? So if you'd asked me...
How far we are.
Yeah, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I said, I'm not following that because I'm going to be dead before it works. So I don't care. And now I'm not so confident in my dying. I think for most of the kinds of things I want to do, quantum won't help, right? Mostly I want to do things like saying, let's take all the words on the web and push them through this thing where I'm doing a little bit of computation on each one. And so quantum is not going to help that. It's not an I/O-focused approach. It's a combinatorial combination-focused approach. Now, if you told me that a quantum computer could optimize the hyperparameters of my deep network, I'm really interested in that. And I don't think anybody knows yet if we can do that. So yeah, if you have 30 parameters, probably a quantum computer is the right thing to do. But if I have 1 million parameters, is it going to be able to handle it? If I have 10,000 parameters, is it going to be able to handle it? We don't know. We don't have the algorithms, and we don't know what the hardware will be. So it's promising, but uncertain at this point. So I can't give you a time scale.
Hi, Peter. Final question from Brazil. My question is about, so blockchain technology and the Bitcoin, they were revolutionary. But I don't think the average person can just go to the grocery and buy avocados with it. And recently we had the announcement of Libra. My father doesn't know how to buy avocados with Bitcoins, but if Libra is user-friendly and cost-effective, he will buy it because he has an account on Facebook. So I would like to know your opinion about that, which might be like a huge central bank in the world, and how AI could play a role in this new thing?
Well, first of all, there are a bunch of stores on University Ave where you can buy stuff with Bitcoin. So within a couple of miles of here, you're good. But for the rest of the world, I agree, that may be harder. I don't know, I guess, you know, as a resident of the U.S., I feel like, well, I already have access to a currency that's fairly stable. So that isn't as much of an issue for me. I recognize that there are parts of the world where having more stability would be good, and so I think that part, Bitcoin potentially could play a role, and that could be good. And in terms of the privacy aspects, I think that cuts both ways. Yeah, there are some cases where you would like to be able to make transactions that are private, but I don't like the idea that people can have ransomware and can get paid for it without being tracked down. So I think there's trade-offs there.
I think before we end, I just wanted to finish with asking you if you would take a swing at, like, what are two or one profession you think like it's most at risk and will go away maybe sooner, and what do you think is maybe a new occupation that's coming up because of the shift we're going through?
Radiologist. Right. I think we can read X-rays better than they can, so that will be one that's a threat. And I guess anything having to do with interacting with people is the key. And I think we've seen some of that, in that we've seen, like, the U.S. is much more of a service economy now, right? So we have fewer people whose job is welding and more whose job is yoga instructor. Or something like that, where it's the direct personal interaction is important, and for now, people do that better than machines do. And even if machines will do it well, a lot of people will still want that genuine human contact. You know, be labeled genuine human. It's like being organic. It's a positive connotation. So you're still going to have jobs.
So less X-rays and more yoga and avocados, I guess. Okay, Peter, this has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much.